So today's video is going to be a little controversial, definitely a hot take, but I'm going to be arguing 7 reasons why the Land Rover Defender 110 is a better overall pick over a Ford Bronco. All right, before everybody starts screaming in the comments below, I want to explain myself a little bit and give you a little bit of a backstory. For those of you that don't know me and my channel, I've owned a Ford Bronco for the last 3 years. I bought it brand new in 2021. It was a big bend, non-Sasquatch, which I later converted to the Sasquatch suspension and wheel and tire setup. And I love that car. I'd recommend it to a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of people out there could enjoy a Bronco very much. And I just recently sold the vehicle. Now, in regards to my experience with the Defender, I've driven this vehicle around for about a week. Land Rover was very kind enough to lend me this Defender 110, but this isn't my first experience with a Defender. I actually had a Defender 130 about a year and a half ago, which is essentially the same thing as this, but it has about an extra 13 inches in the back and a functional third row. But other than that, it's almost identical. And in the last 2 times I've had a Land Rover Defender, I've driven it over 500 miles and have really gotten to know this vehicle. And because of that, I figured I could provide a good perspective between the Defender and the Ford Bronco. And today I'm going to discuss why I think for the majority of people out there, the Defender is a better choice. Now we'll talk pricing, features, everything in today's video. But the first thing I want to break down is who this video is for. Now, if you're the type of person that takes your vehicle off-roading every single weekend, and we're talking not just off-roading, we're talking extreme rock crawling, you're hitting the bash plates, you're customizing your vehicle, you're getting extra inches of height to the point where 35-inch tires are nowhere near enough to the extreme off-roading that you do, this video is not for you. You should definitely stick to a Bronco and maybe even a Wrangler because it has a solid front axle. It's probably the best off-roader. Today's video is intended for those of you that either never go off-roading, in which case you probably shouldn't even look at a Bronco or a Wrangler to begin with since the use case is primarily off-road, or for the people like me who daily drive their vehicle but also take it off-roading maybe 3, 4, 5 plus or minus times a year. And I think that's the majority of people out there who buy this, the Bronco or the Wrangler. Now, people in the comments would love to start trolling people and say, oh, you just own a mall crawler or a grocery getter or whatever they want to call you. They'll think of some creative comments down below. And the truth is, yeah, that's why I own a car. I don't own a car for one single use case to just take it off-roading all the time. In fact, a lot of us who pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a car do not want to take it off-roading every single weekend to the point where we could damage a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 vehicle. We want a vehicle that can do it all, and at the same time, we could take it off-roading occasionally. So if you're the type of person that owns this vehicle to take it to the mall, take it to go get groceries, you take it to your kid's soccer practice, you drive to and from work in this vehicle, and at the same time, you occasionally want to go off-roading, adventure out into the woods, enjoy camping, and do things that you normally wouldn't do in like a typical crossover, this video is intended for those people. And it's meant to convince you that the Defender is a better pick than a Ford Bronco. That's coming from a Ford Bronco owner. So without further ado, let's kick off the 7 reasons why this is the better overall choice. Now, the first reason why the Defender is the better overall pick over a Ford Bronco is kind of obvious. This is a better daily driver. Now, there's a couple things at play here. The first has to do with the suspension. So this vehicle rides a lot softer than the Ford Bronco. I drove over the exact same bumps I did in my Bronco, and this thing soaks it up much better. It's a much softer suspension and you don't feel it as much inside of the cabin. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a Mercedes S-Class when it comes to ride quality and suspension feel, but it is a major difference to the Ford Bronco. This feels like a typical crossover, maybe even a little bit softer. It feels a little bit more upscale. Now, there's a couple reasons why that is. The first is this vehicle is a unibody construction, which is almost identical to the majority of crossovers out there. That is where the frame and the body are essentially one giant piece. As opposed to the Ford Bronco and even the Jeep Wrangler, they are body-on-frame vehicles. And that is where the body and the frame of the vehicle are two separate components that are simply bolted together. In case of the Ford Bronco, it's actually the same frame as the Ford Ranger, and they have the Bronco body on top of it. So in addition to the suspension, it also rides a little bit more like a truck because it's a body-on-frame vehicle. Now, what's interesting is the prior generation Defender was also a body-on-frame vehicle, but Land Rover decided to adapt this into a unibody construction because it makes for a more daily drivable vehicle. Now, this vehicle has an independent four-wheel suspension. So that means that each wheel can travel independently of one another. Unlike the Ford Bronco, where you have an independent front suspension, however, in the back, you have a solid axle, which means the left and the right-hand side are directly connected. So if one side goes up, the other side is gonna go down. Now, the Bronco is a much better highway cruiser than the Wrangler because of the independent front suspension, but it still has a more truck-like feel because that rear end is a solid axle. So when you go over a speed bump, you're gonna feel it on both the left and the right-hand side because they're directly connected. Now, the second part of that daily drivability has to do with road noise. I've talked about this in other Ford Bronco videos of mine, but the Bronco was a very loud interior. Now, obviously, one of the biggest contributors to that was the fact that I had a soft top roof. However, I drove the hard top version of the Bronco, and it was still pretty loud on the interior. It was by no means a quiet vehicle. Now, the downside with the Defender is the roof does not come off, the doors do not come off. However, because of that, it's a much quieter cabin on the inside. I gotta say, this is probably as quiet, if not quieter, than my Rivian. It's a very quiet interior cabin. They've got really good sound insulation. You can barely hear the engine, and you can't really hear much of the road noise. I haven't had any issues talking with passengers in the second row in this vehicle as opposed to my Bronco, where at highway speeds, which is almost what I'm traveling right now, there would be no way to have a conversation with people in the second row. I'd have to shout from the passenger side to hear me. And I know some of you might be complaining that the doors don't come off, the roof doesn't come off. However, if you live in a climate like I do, where it's either too hot in the summer or way too cold in the wintertime, you really only get to enjoy the soft top roof and the removable doors maybe 2 months out of the year, maybe 3 months, and not every single day either. There's gonna be some days that are rainy or cloudy or cold. It's really, in total, 2 to 3 months divided across the year. And so it might make more sense to have a vehicle that doesn't have removable doors or roof and have the better sound quality on the inside, because two contributing factors that make for a very exhaustive experience when you're driving in a vehicle is road noise and ride quality. And I found myself getting home after driving in the Bronco as my daily driver being a little bit more exhausted or a little bit more agitated than in any other vehicles that I had as my press cars, because it was louder, it was rougher, it was just not as relaxing of an experience daily driving in my Bronco as it is in this Defender. Now, if you don't believe me, I'm right now driving on a washboard road. It's actually the same road I drove my Ford Bronco on, and it is a much softer and much quieter experience inside of this Defender. I mean, you probably can't even tell on camera that I'm going over some bumps because it's just soaking it up so well. In my Bronco on this exact same road just about 2 years ago, you could not only hear the rocks flying up, but you could also feel the bouncing as you're going over this road. It was really not a comfortable experience. And I think it's because the suspension isn't necessarily set up for washboard roads. It's more set up for rock crawling and really extreme off-roading, and not just a dirt canyon road that, you know, a lot of crossovers are more so set up for than like a Wrangler or a Bronco. Now, the second reason is kind of a smaller reason, but it does factor into decision making, and that is the fact that this vehicle is a little bit larger on the inside. Now, in terms of cargo volume, it's actually very similar to the Bronco, but I've argued before that the reason the Bronco wins on cargo space for the most part is because of its height, not necessarily because of usable space. Now, first off, the Land Rover Defender is a tad bit wider. It's about 3 inches or so wider than a Bronco, and for that reason, the interior cabin is a little bit more spacious. However, in terms of length, it's almost identical to the Bronco. In fact, it's just a tad bit shorter, so this could still easily fit inside of your garage. And if you need a functional third row, this is the only option for you in terms of off-roading, because not only can you get a third row in this Defender 110, albeit a very small one in the back, Land Rover also offers a 3-row version, which is the Defender 130 that I reviewed last year, and I encourage you to check it out if you guys are interested. But that's really the only functional 3-row off-roader you can get in today's market. Now, again, on paper, the Bronco has a larger trunk, but I've experienced this firsthand. I've owned a Ford Bronco, and I gotta say, the floor on this Defender is a little bit larger. The Bronco wins in terms of height, but actual usable floor space is a little bit more spacious here. And I know this because the Bronco can't be had in a third row, whereas this particular Defender 110 can. Also, jumping into the second row, you have more legroom for second row passengers in this vehicle by about 3 or so inches. You're looking at almost 40 inches of legroom behind the first row and plenty of space back here. Also, the width of this vehicle being wider allows you to have a more functional middle seat and a little bit more of a spacious cabin when you're sitting in the first row. Now, the third reason why this is still a better overall pick is because the Defender is still an incredibly capable off-road vehicle. So first off, let's talk about the air suspension. So my particular tester today has the air ride suspension. It's about a $1,600 option, but it allows this vehicle in this highest mode to have a little bit over 11 inches of ground clearance, which is very, very respectable for off-roading. Now, it's no Bronco Sasquatch with about 13 or so inches of ground clearance, but this is much more than your average crossover, which is sitting just around 8 inches. However, if you want to use this as a daily driver to get your older parents or grandparents in and out of the vehicle, this thing can slam itself down into access height mode, which has about a ground clearance of about 8 inches or so, which is again more of a conventional crossover. So this air ride suspension, in my opinion, is a must because not only does it serve a more daily drivability purpose, but it also serves in better off-roading. Secondly, this vehicle comes with a rear locker as an optional feature. My particular tester here does have the rear locker, and you've got standard all-wheel drive with a low-range transfer case. Furthermore, my particular vehicle with the off-road package has underbody skid plate protection. So if you do bash this vehicle against some rocks when you're going off-roading, you're not going to necessarily damage any engine or transmission components. And you can equip your Defender with these Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires. Now, these aren't the mud terrain tires that you get on the Sasquatch package from the Bronco, but these are just as capable as the base tires you get on the regular Bronco Big Bend. They still have a decent amount of tread for you to go off-roading. In fact, I just took it on some pretty washboard roads and pretty big ruts in the road, and these did perfectly fine. No complaints there. Obviously, if I'm doing extensive rock crawling, these aren't the best choice, but then again, the Defender isn't the best choice for you, but this video is not intended for hardcore rock crawling. And then coming to the back, I should mention you also have a limited slip differential back here, which makes it a little bit easier to go off-roading when not engaging that rear locker if your particular Defender doesn't come with it. And then if you're the type of person that wants to take your Defender off-roading into some water, the Defender actually has higher water weighting or water fording capabilities than the Bronco. We're talking just under 36 inches, so just under 3 feet of water fording capabilities in this max height mode. It's pretty impressive. Speaking of water fording, if you go into your infotainment screen, you can go into your wade sensing menu, and this vehicle uses ultrasonic sensors all throughout the vehicle to tell you exactly what height that water is on your vehicle. So you don't have to jump out of the car and measure, you can actually see what's going on the screen here. So max height right now in the highest mode is 2 feet 11 inches. And as you're going through water, it will show you visually on the screen where that water level is located. That is not a feature the Ford Bronco comes with on any trim level. You also have a variety of four-wheel drive modes, similar to the Bronco, where you can see your pitch and your angles. And then this vehicle, on every single trim level, comes with a standard 360-degree camera, which also has a snazzy off-road mode. So not only do you have a front camera, but you've got this underbody camera. Not really. It actually uses snazzy software to essentially take an image of what's going on under the vehicle, and that way you can tell exactly what rock is going to be at what position underneath your axles. That is a very neat feature that the Bronco also doesn't come with. So as you can see, the Land Rover Defender is still more capable than your average crossover. It's an incredibly capable off-roader, but just not quite as much as the Bronco or the Wrangler because it doesn't have the front locker. It doesn't have a sway bar disconnect or any of those fancy features, but I reckon this vehicle is going to be capable in 99.9% of all scenarios you're ever going to take your vehicle through. Now, the next reason this is a better overall pick is the powertrain, or I should say the powertrain options. There are 3 different options for the Defender. The first is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that produces just shy of 300 horsepower. That's not really the one I'm talking about, but it is pretty comparable to the 2.3-liter EcoBoost in the Bronco. The step up from that engine is called the P400 engine, and that's the one I have behind me. It's a 3-liter turbocharged inline 6 with a mild hybrid system, and it produces a pretty respectable 395 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque. I believe 0 to 60 is just around the mid 5-second range. Now, this engine is more powerful than the twin turbocharged EcoBoost 2.7 liter V6 that you can get in the Ford Bronco. Now, obviously you can get the Bronco Raptor, which has an even more powerful engine, but you can also get a supercharged V8 inside of the Defender at a pretty absurd sticker price, similar to the Raptor. So I'm not really comparing those. I'm comparing the mid-engine setup, which is the 2.7 liter EcoBoost, versus this P400 engine. And this engine, in my opinion, is the perfect setup for a vehicle of this size and weight. I haven't driven the 2 liter 4-cylinder, so I can't really provide my opinion on that, but I will say this thing is quick. I've mashed the pedal on this vehicle and it's had no issues accelerating and passing people on the freeway. It's a pretty peppy engine and it's paired to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and this feels quicker hands down than the 2.7 liter V6 in the Bronco. I drove one at the off-rodeo and it's a very quick engine. It's decent, it's solid for that powertrain. Same with the 2.3 liter EcoBoost, but it doesn't feel quite as quick as this vehicle with that mild hybrid setup. Now, despite this engine having more horsepower and a bigger displacement than the Bronco, its fuel economy is no worse. In fact, it's probably a little bit better. We're talking 17 in the city, 20 on the highway for 18 combined. And I was getting about 18 to 19 mpg on my 2.3 liter EcoBoost with the Sasquatch package. So that's not even the 2.7 liter that I'm comparing this engine to. So if you look at it pound for pound, there's no compromises with this particular engine setup. Now, the fifth reason why the Defender is a better overall vehicle has to do with the towing capacity. Now, that was one of my biggest complaints about the Bronco. Even though it's a body-on-frame vehicle with the chassis of a Ford Ranger, because of its off-road suspension, the towing capacity was limited. The max towing is 3,500 pounds on the Bronco. If you choose the Bronco Raptor, you push it up to 4,500. But the Defender 110, even though it's a unibody construction, has a max towing capacity of 8,200 pounds. Now, I'm not saying you should push that 8,200 pound limit, but if you want to attach a trailer with some toys, with a decently sized camper, the Defender is the better option. The Bronco just can't tow as much as the Defender. And I think that's one of its Achilles heels, because everybody who wants to go overlanding wants to have a vehicle that can tow a decent amount of weight. In addition, the roof of this vehicle can support upwards of 220 pounds. So if you want to put a rooftop tent, it's very capable inside of the Defender. So it's kind of the ultimate overlanding vehicle, as opposed to the soft top Bronco where you shouldn't be putting any weight on top of the roof. Now, for the sixth reason why this is the better overall pick is simply because it's more luxurious. So you're paying for a more premium vehicle. Now, this particular vehicle that I'm testing today is at an $82,000 price point. It's definitely above the ones that I'm talking about for the purposes of today's video, but a lot of what I'm going to show off in terms of luxury features comes standard on the base trim level of the Defender S. You still get soft touch materials up here. You've got this cool personality with these Torx head bolts. They don't actually serve any purpose aside from making it look a little bit more rugged. You still have a body painted door panel over here. You'll still get a Meridian sound system. I believe 10 speakers is standard, and you still have leather touch surfaces all throughout. Same with the seats. You're not going to get genuine leather, of course, but you're going to have a vinyl leather. They're not going to be cloth seats like on the base trim level of the Bronco. They're still going to be power operated, and you're still going to get heated functionality. You'll also get a heated steering wheel, and I love the interior design of this Defender. So it's actually reminiscent of the Bronco. You kind of have this very flat dash with Defender script located all the way across the passenger side. You have this faux leather wrapped grab handle on the passenger side as well. And you've got this cool use of textured material. So this is kind of a white plastic, but it's got a cool texture to it. You got a little shelf over here, shelf over there with some USB ports. And in fact, this section over here is a pass-through behind the screen, so it's very utilitarian in how it looks. Even the vents are boxy and squarish, but this is all soft touch material up above you. It's not the hard touch plastic you found in the Bronco. Talking about the technology here, it's more advanced than the Bronco. We're looking at a 12.3-inch instrument gauge cluster display. It's all digital with a variety of different modes, so you can cycle through a full screen navigation or your driver assistance features. You do have adaptive cruise control here. And then talking about the center infotainment screen, this is the 10-inch screen. However, I believe as of 2025, every single Defender 110 is going to come with the larger 11.4-inch touchscreen display that actually curves over this section over here. In fact, the Defender 130 I reviewed last year came with that. It has wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto. As I noted earlier, you get the 360 camera as standard as well. And then everything here is also utilitarian. It's got this kind of rubberized texture to it. Everything feels a little bit more sturdy. And then these multi-use buttons, so your heated seats can be regulated with this, along with your drive modes. You've got plenty of drive modes here. Now, these aren't all going to be on the base trim level because this has some off-road packages, but you've got pretty much a drive mode for every single off-road scenario you're going to be driving in. And then I love the design of this section. So it has these Torx head bolts over here. This can be covered in a wood material or this kind of robust deck interior on my particular trim level. You've also got USB ports, power outlets. You've got large storage compartments, wireless charging pad, and then this one also has the digital rear view camera mirror, which is of course an optional feature, but every single Defender will still come with this panoramic sunroof and those Alpine windows in the back. And in general, the design is very luxurious and upscale. This feels more luxurious than a Bronco or a Wrangler. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a Mercedes GLE interior, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a more luxurious off-roader, and it accomplishes that very well. And then even in the second row, the door panel is the exact replica of the first row. You can get genuine leather, of course, with faux leather being standard. You still have a center armrest, which is not something I had in my Bronco. Another thing I didn't have in my Bronco is second row air vents. You have those back here. Now, 3-zone climate control is an optional feature, and heated seats are as well, but air vents come standard on every single trim level. It's just a little bit more upscale than your Bronco interior. And of course, the Land Rover name carries a little bit more oomph than the Ford nameplate. Now, Ford has a very strong lineage, of course, but Land Rover is generally known to be a slightly more luxurious vehicle. Of course, not Range Rover territory, but still more upscale than a Toyota, Ford, or Chevy. Now, the seventh and final reason has to do with this vehicle's personality and charm. So one of the things that makes the Ford Bronco a really compelling pick, along with the Jeep Wrangler, is they have a certain charm and a certain personality to them. There's compromises, of course, with that, but it's cool. It's awesome to have a Bronco. It looks cool. Its doors come off. Its roof comes off. This one doesn't have two of those big features, but it does look cool, and it still has a certain charm to it. I can't really explain what it is. I've driven a lot of two-row crossovers on my channel, and I've reviewed a lot of them, but for some reason, I walk away from the Defender always impressed with it, always wanting to get into the vehicle and drive it a little bit more. Very similar to my experience with the Bronco. They have a certain charm to them that you just can't replicate with any other two-row crossover like a BMW X5 or a Mercedes GLE. Those things are just kind of status quo, whereas this has a little bit more presence to it. And I think part of that has to do with its styling. This thing, honestly, from a distance, looks a little bit like the retro Defender, and it has certain cues from that Defender, like the little fake plates that they have on the hood that in the old Defenders were used to get on top of the roof. Even the headlights, they're square, but they're circular. You have the LEDs that add a little bit of a modern touch to it, but you still have the old school Land Rover badging. I like the Defender logo is popping out of the hood. You also have the same Alpine windows that you had on the old Defenders, and even though they serve no purpose, they kind of have this retro throwback to them, along with this kind of weird plate that they decided to put on the C-pillar. I don't hate it. It just adds to the personality of this vehicle. And then I love the rear end of it. It looks really cool. You've got these LED taillights that look really nice lit up at night. You still have this lift gate that opens sideways with the tire located on the trunk. Just still has that off-road but luxurious but charming exterior styling. And the same applies to the interior. In regards to the seating position, you kind of feel on top of the world. You feel like you're sitting on top of everything, very similar to a Bronco and a Wrangler. You still have this very large greenhouse where you can see everything going on around you. I'm not gonna lie, this kind of sounds funny, but this thing feels British. I feel like I should be wearing a tweed coat and speaking in a British accent when I get in this car, and it makes me feel cool. It makes me feel different. You're not gonna have any less personality in the Defender as opposed to the Bronco or the Wrangler. Now, I gotta say, I think the Bronco gets a little bit more attention because more people know what it is. It's a little bit more accessible in terms of its pricing, but the Defender, for those that know, is a very striking looking vehicle, and especially in certain color combos, this thing is definitely going to turn heads, maybe even as much, if not more, than a Bronco. Now, the last thing I want to address to those of you screaming at the screen for the last 15 or so minutes, and that is pricing. Obviously, the pricing of the Defender is at a higher point than the Bronco. The entry-level Broncos, I would say in the high 30s, low $40,000 range. My particular Big Bend was just around $42,000 when it was new. If I spec'd it the same way today, it'd probably be around $47,000, $48,000. However, here's my argument to the pricing. The most fully equipped Ford Bronco Wildtrak, with the Sasquatch package and everything included, of course, is in the high $60,000 range. The entry-level price of the Land Rover Defender 110 with the base engine is just around $60,000. Now, if you choose the P400 engine, which I would recommend, some of the off-road goodies like the air suspension and the underbody protection with the rear locker, you're looking at somewhere around a $73,000, $74,000 vehicle. The difference between a fully equipped Bronco and a more basic trim level but off-road capable Defender is just a few grand here or there, especially if you start looking in the used car market. You can get a slightly used Defender, even though they still hold good resale value, in the mid to high $60,000 range. So when you start looking at it apples to apples, they are pretty similarly priced. Even though the pricing I'm discussing is for a more basic Defender, it comes with more technology out of the gate. You still get heated seats, a heated steering wheel. You still get that 360-degree camera. You still have a nice faux leather wrapped interior. Those are all things that would come on the Bronco Wildtrak. And some Broncos, including the Heritage Edition, are in the $70,000 range. Now, of course, I'm excluding the Bronco Raptor because that's not really a direct competitor to the regular Defender, but pricing really isn't that dramatically different. Now, obviously, if you're looking at an entry-level Bronco, the Defender 110 is probably a little bit out of your price range. That being said, there are plenty of people out there that are paying the $60,000 to $70,000 for a Bronco, and that's evidenced by the fact that as of 2024, Ford got rid of the base trim level. The Big Bend is now the entry-level trim level. So I think that the higher priced Broncos are the ones that are selling a little bit more than the entry-level ones, at which point the price difference between this and the Bronco is not as big of a pill to swallow. Well, there you have it, folks. That was the 7 reasons why I would recommend a Defender 110 as the better overall choice for your primary car over a Ford Bronco. It is just a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife compared to the Bronco, which is a better off-roader, but a little bit compromised in some of the other things that a lot of people use their vehicles for. But I'm curious to hear everybody else's thoughts. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of disagreements in the comments below, but I'd like to hear everybody's opinion. Also, if you guys enjoyed this video and this hot take of the Defender 110, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. Also, check me out on all the social media at Schwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day. I'm going to get back in this vehicle and keep driving it before Land Rover takes it away.